So, tomorrow is the next live letter, and instead of feeling excited, I feel dread. Why? Well, it all comes back to Island Sanctuary. You see, when Island Sanctuary first was introduced or talked about, it was talked about as if it was going to be content for crafters and gatherers, while also having content for people who don't craft or gather. After that, there was a long silence, no news about the content, but of course I stayed optimistic because we had just had the Firmament, which is the best crafting and gathering content this game has ever offered. My opinion, but it's true. So, with positive mind, I waited, and it took a long time before we got more news about Island Sanctuary and what it was going to be like. The next time we actually got more news about the Sanctuary, they had changed the wording a little bit. Instead of being content for crafters and gatherers, it was now content for everyone while also having content for crafters and gatherers. Still, they promised content for my favorite thing, crafting and gathering. So I was excited. Up until the release of Island Sanctuary, they would not tell us anything except that it was going to be content that everyone can do, even if they didn't have crafters and gatherers. With the amount of crafting and gathering mentioned, you would think this content was indeed going to have crafting and gathering. Right? I would be the most disappointed person on this planet when it finally dropped. Now, in case you don't know what Island Sanctuary is like, let me tell you. It is content that dropped in Endwalker. You know, the expansion where we didn't have relic weapon grind, so there was not that much to do, unless you wanted to do dungeons and raid. So for me, someone who likes to craft and gather, getting content for that would have made it so that I'm good for the rest of expansion until the next one. But what we got was not crafting and gathering content. Actually, I would go as far as to say it was no content at all. What Island Sanctuary really was like one of those mobile games where you press buttons to get timers going, and then you have to wait until the things are ready, and then you can do it again to continue your gameplay. Except there was no way to pay to get these upgrades faster like in those cash grab games. So it was just a waiting game. I still remember how some people had a really aggressive campaign on Twitter about how it's supposed to be casual content. It's supposed to be done slowly, and taking your time with it and having fun with it, and if you wanted to go fast, you were playing wrong. Imagine playing Final Fantasy XIV and being told you're playing wrong, in content that doesn't involve other people. Kind of reminds me what happened when they released Dawn Trail. People were telling those who didn't like the main Xeno request to stop playing the game, as if MSQ is everything and the game has nothing else to offer. Ridiculous, isn't it? So, what did I do when Island Sanctuary dropped? I went in and I grinded. Why? Because the more you worked from the beginning, the faster you could get those damn timers to start. Because once you started the building things on the island, you couldn't do anything except wait or grind. So of course the most optimal thing was to level up by gathering, and when I say gathering, I'm being very generous. The difference between Island Sanctuary gathering and normal gathering is that the Sanctuary looked at gathering and said, what if we just don't do any of that and instead only take the part where you run from node to node? That sounds like fun. That is not fun. So while waiting for the timers to be done, by gathering you could get the experience points you needed to have the levels to continue building right away. Now you could get these experience points from the buildings themselves once they were ready, but rather than wait for hours to play the game, it was easier to play the game while waiting. The crafting on Island Sanctuary was the kind of crafting you see in other games, where you have the materials and then you press a button. Your character does an animation and the craft is ready, which I think is a disgrace in Final Fantasy XIV with the kind of systems we have. Imagine if Island Sanctuary crafting had some similar aspects to actual crafting in 14. It could have been like an introduction for people on what actual crafting in the game is like. It could have been like 6 different skills that people can use to make these items, but no, make it a button people can press so they can be done with it. So what did Island Sanctuary actually offer for crafters and gatherers? Few expert recipes. Now, ever since the Firmament, I've loved expert recipes. I really hope they would do more with those. I hope we could have the so-called casual crafting that all of the crafting has now become, because they made it easier for people, so people could get crafted gear easier. I think it was like back in Shadowbringers. So I think it would be nice if they would really go in on expert crafting and give us like housing items, glamour items, that kind of stuff that we could do with expert crafting. Now, before any of you non-crafters get angry at me saying that then you would have to buy it on the market board because you didn't craft, and that's not fair, I think it's not fair that currently you have to use hours and hours of time to craft stuff and get very little gil for it. Not to mention, you're against people who bot and people who use mods that tell them when they've been undercut and who knows what else cheats there are. I don't think that's fair. Meanwhile, the game keeps getting more and more items that can be gotten through battle content, which is either very hard, criterion and chaotic, or RNG based treasure maps. So there is no guarantee you would ever have the luck of getting those items in the first place. So why is it so wrong for gatherers and crafters to have something that they could sell that isn't as easy to do as macro crafting? For some reason, people love to say that all content is not for everyone, except when it comes to crafting and gathering. When talking about those, suddenly everything has to be easy and accessible and boring. Now, easy and accessible do not equal boring, but Final Fantasy XIV has a really hard time making the difference. So in the end, in an expansion where they were trying new things like relic weapons that could be bought with just tomestones, we got an AFK sanctuary, a place where you could go and do nothing and get rewarded for it. And if you wanted to play the game, the content that it had, it was just bad. Honestly, if gathering in this game was like it is in Island Sanctuary, I would understand why people use bots. It was that bad. So while Island Sanctuary wasn't content for crafters and gatherers, I don't think it was content for everyone, because it was no content at all. So for destroying my hopes and dreams after the firmament, Island Sanctuary is something I will never forgive. I will always have it in my heart to hate it whenever I remember its existence, which thankfully isn't often, because it was so underwhelming. But every time I do remember it, I don't remember it fondly. So why did I decide to talk about this years-old content right before the next live letter for patch 7.2? Just because I was reminded of Island Sanctuary and the hype they were building around it, just to be completely let down when I was wondering if we were going to get any news about the cosmic exploration in this live letter. Instead of feeling excitement and optimism, I feel dread and like if I give them a chance they let me down again. They say it's going to be content like the Firmament and Island Sanctuary, but I think it's wrong of them to lump those two things together. Because one is crafting and gathering content we had never seen in the game. There was so much to do, there were achievements, you could level your jobs there, make gil by gathering materials for others. We got expert recipes, and there was a longer goal in achievements which gave you a mount, and once you farmed for it for 3 months straight, it was really rewarding. While the other content is, let's say it nicely, not rewarding, and there's not much anything to do. I know it's a controversial opinion, but I don't think everything should be gotten by just logging into the game. It pisses me off. It really pisses me off. It really made it feel like Island Sanctuary was there just to keep people subscribed to the game for 10 minutes of weekly playtime. Let me play the game and be rewarded for playing the game. There needs to be a balance between giving players stuff during the patches and giving players stuff to work towards during the patches. It can't be just one or the other. So, when they reference cosmic exploration as new lifestyle content, I can't help but worry it's going to be like Island Sanctuary and not like Escort Restoration. Of course, I don't want it to be just like Escort Restoration, we already have that. But I just don't think I can be optimistic about content anymore when they announce it years before releasing it, then keeping full radio silence before the live letter that leads to it. Because I don't want to be hurt like I was when Island Sanctuary dropped. I don't want to be disappointed by my favorite game time and time again. So hopefully after the live letter, or after the second part of the live letter, this video ages badly. I hope all these negative thoughts that I have and this worry I have for cosmic exploration is unfounded, because it would mean that in the future I don't have to look at past content to think, is the new content going to be any good? If you listened until the end of this video, thank you. Please tell me how you feel about Island Sanctuary, what your hopes for cosmic exploration are, and anything that's on your mind really, because that's what I just did. I will be making another video talking about my thoughts after the live letter if they talk about cosmic exploration. If they don't talk about it, I think I'm just going to give up on waiting for it at all, because I want to like Final Fantasy XIV, and if after all the waiting we get another Island Sanctuary, I think that would very much negatively impact my view of Final Fantasy XIV. But you'll hear from me after the next live letter, because while I do not intend to talk about Island Sanctuary anymore, I wish to talk about upcoming content that we may have, because it's something to be excited for after all the battle content we've gotten through the Dawntrail expansion. Finally something else. Thank you for watching and listening, and you'll hear more bad opinions next time. Bye bye.
Of course, crafters and gatherers will be able to do different types of things here, but of course this is something for everyone.